We begin the Gita with Vishada Yoga. Vishada means despondency, depression, inability to function, distress. These are all the states of the person who is starting out on the path of wisdom. He starts as a confused person, a troubled person, because he cannot understand, he cannot make a decision, he cannot distinguish what is eternal values, what are transient values. He does not know what is the higher self, what is the transient self. He does not know what is dharma, what is adharma. So these sort of confusions, state of confused mind, that is Arjuna's mind. This is how the Gita starts. That is called Arjuna Vishada Yoga, chapter 1. Chapter 2 is called Sankhya Yoga. Now Sankhya is one of the classical darshanas of India. Like we said, Indian culture has so many aspects. There is the Vedic dharam, the dharam based on the Vedas, which does rituals, which believes in so many gods. And then there is the Shad Darshanas, or the 6 classical systems of philosophy, in which we find Sankhya, Yoga, Nyaya, Vaisheshika, Purva Mimamsa, Uttara Mimamsa. Sankhya system is one of the first of the 6 classical systems. Sankhya is attributed to a sage called Kapila. Kapila Muni is credited for writing down the Sankhya Sutras. And the Sankhya Yoga gives us the ideas of gunas, pragriti. See, all the later philosophies have used the idea of 3 gunas, sattva, rajas and tamas. This is first introduced by the Sankhyan philosopher, Kapila. And Sankhya has a counterpart in Yoga. Yoga also accepts Sankhyan philosophy. Nyaya and Vaisheshika are dealing with logic, and Visheshika is dealing with atomicity. So this is what is known as the classical darshanas, Shad Darshanas. So the Gita uses the same idea of Sankhya here, but with a slightly modified sense. The Gita has its own way of interpreting Sankhya. It is not like the Sankhya of Kapila. The emphasis here is on reasoning, because Sankhya Darshana is one of the atheistic darshanas. Without the use of God, they have explained how this world has come into creation, how individual beings have come into creation, etc. So, that Sankhya Yoga is dealing with the rational faculty. That is, we are using our reasoning, and with the help of our reasoning, we are arriving at a clear understanding of the nature of the self. And that is what is given in the 2nd chapter. After the Vishada Yoga, Krishna clears the doubts of Arjuna by explaining to him the nature of the transient self, the nature of the Atma, the nature of the body, and how he is grieving for something which he should not grieve about. And he develops his argument by so many methods, which we will come to know when we go into the details of the chapter. But the second half of the same 2nd chapter is dealing with yoga. So Sankhya and yoga are 2 subjects that are dealt with in the 2nd chapter. Then the 3rd chapter we come to is called Karma Yoga. Karma means action. And now there are 2 strong ways of thinking in the Indian mind. One is the way of renunciation. The way of renunciation means that by karma we cannot get our salvation. No matter how many good deeds we do throughout our lifetime, we will not be released from the bondage of birth and death and suffering and the general worldliness around us. We cannot be released by karma. Karma can purify our mind. When we do sat karma, good karmas, the good karmas that we perform will lead to a purification of our mind. It will make our character better. It will make our personality more harmonious. It can make us into happier people. Karma can have a karma yoga to it. When we make it into a yoga, then ordinary karma or brute karma is converted into a yoga. Ordinary karma means when a person is working for a benefit in mind. Benefit motivated, self-centered, that is ordinary karma. But when that same action becomes for the welfare of people and without any interest of gaining anything, you're doing something for the sake of doing it, out of pure intention. You don't have any intention of gain or any such thing. You just do it because you think it's the right thing to do, the proper thing to do. You do your best and you leave the result to God. Then it becomes karma yoga. And that is praised as a superior way of working rather than working with an end in view, with a profit in view, with a benefit in mind, and then doing your work only for this reason that you will benefit by it, or with a self-interest, that your happiness. So this is how karma can become converted into karma yoga. And when karma becomes converted into karma yoga, it leads to the freedom of a person. As long as a person is having plain karma, that person will become bound. He'll be in a state of anxiety and tension. But if it becomes karma yoga, naturally the person becomes freed. He becomes free of anxiety, he becomes free of worrying about what will be the outcome, because he knows the outcome will always be favorable. So this is the first step in purification, or the elevation of a person from the situation where we are normally unenlightened persons or ordinary persons who have no guidance from wisdom. For them, you have to start thinking of karma yoga. That is the third chapter, karma yoga. The fourth chapter deals with jnana now. Once karma has to become guided by jnana, knowledge. Knowledge should be there always to give a proper orientation to karma. If you allow karma to get the upper hand, then that person's actions will become very uncertain. But when knowledge is given the upper hand, thoughtfulness and clear understanding is used, then you say actions will have a proper orientation. So jnana, knowledge is given superiority. Though knowledge has been given superiority, yet we should not abandon our karma. This is a special contribution of the Gita. In the old days, what used to happen was when people thought of sannyasa or following the path of knowledge, they used to abandon karmas. But that abandoning of karma used to lead to negativity. They used to get into a void, a vacuum, and find that they cannot function anymore. So to avoid that sort of thing from happening, Gita recommends you should perform your actions, but don't be benefit motivated. Don't fall into inaction. Don't become akarma. So there is akarma, vikarma and sukarma. 3 types of karmas. Akarma means inaction, vikarma means wrong action, and sukarma means good action. We should always do sukarma. We should avoid akarma, and we should never do vikarma. So this is how karma has to become regulated with knowledge. This is the 4th chapter. That takes us to the 5th chapter called Karma Sannyasa Yoga. Here you are resolving once and for all the issue of karma. You understand what is karma in terms of knowledge, how we have to handle our karma, how we have to be oriented towards knowledge. And that takes us into the 6th chapter. 6th chapter deals with dhyana, or contemplation. You cannot contemplate, you cannot think deeply if your mind is agitated by all kinds of activities. So first, the purification that takes place is the resolution of karmas. Slowly, the battle is also converted within. When we start the Gita, the battle is outside. The 2 armies are facing each other outside on the battlefield. But by the time we have come to the 5th chapter, Jahi Shatru Mahabhaho Kamarupam Durasadam. Then he says that it is the kama, the desires that keep welling up in a person. That desire is one of the worst enemies of mankind. And so try to get rid of that desire. That is the Shatru. So the battle now has been converted into what is going on within the person. The real battle is within everybody, in the conflict of values that take place between good and bad desire, benevolence, sharing, caring, self-centeredness, and serving others. So you can make these divisions. So here, after you have resolved this, you say Vita Raga Bhaya Krodha. Once you have got rid of this Bhaya, irrational fear, and Krodha, anger, and Raga, attachment. Once these qualities, which are actually the enemies of the peace of mind, they destroy the peace of mind of human beings. Once they are under control, or once they have been weaned off or purged from the system, then you are able to think deeply about God, life, what is the absolute, and what is your true nature. That comes in the 6th chapter in the form of Dhyana Yoga. And from here you will find that the teachings of the Gita also start taking a turn to more and more subtle and more sublime ideas. After the 6th chapter you come to Jnana Vijnana Yoga, means pure knowledge and applied knowledge. We have pure knowledge, and we have also an applied aspect of knowledge, just like theory and practice, pure science and applied science. We have a pure scientist who would do research and come out with certain findings, and then the technologist will apply that finding into useful products for human beings to improve the people's lives. So that's practical knowledge. But where did he get his ideas from? From a research person who was doing pure thinking. So both theory and practice go together, hand in hand. And here too we are given Jnana Vijnana Yoga, the two aspects, the pure knowledge and the practical. That was the 7th chapter. That takes us to the 8th chapter, which is Akshara Brahma Yoga. Akshara means that which will perish, that which can be destroyed. Akshara means that which will never be destroyed, which is eternal. So this, for the first time, it will introduce to us what is the nature of the imperishable Brahma, the absolute, the supreme, which is indestructible, which is all-pervading, which is the support, which is the ultimate goal and the origin. This non-dual thing or non-thing, we cannot say anything about it. This Akshara Brahma Yoga takes us to the highest teaching, which leads on to the 9th chapter called Rajavidya Rajaguhya, that is the royal sovereign knowledge, and Guhya, secret knowledge. Secret in the sense that it is to be given to the initiated, the person who has prepared himself and is now capable of understanding its subtleties. It becomes an open secret. But to somebody who has not disciplined himself, he cannot understand. So in that sense it is a secret, that it can be understood by the ones who have disciplined. Even if somebody who is not disciplined hears it, he will not understand it. In that sense, Rajavidya, Rajaguhya Yoga, which also brings us to the middle of the Gita, and you find the highest teaching given in the center, called Manmana Bhava Madbhakto Madhyaji Mam Namaskuru. Become one with me, bow down to me. Where Krishna is saying, become one with me. He is speaking of union, that is, that individual consciousness that we have of ourself as me, limited, small person, living in time and space with a social coloration. That's a coloration of my consciousness, like a clear crystal which has no color, but it is placed on a piece of red silk, and the crystal also appears red. Similarly, our psyche too has become colored by the social conditions, genetic colorations, social colorations that we have. We think of ourselves as certain person living in a certain place, time. This is all our colorations. But Krishna is saying, become one with me, which means we have to find our essential nature or our higher nature, which is also the same as the divine. It's not different from the absolute. That is our universal nature. We have a universal aspect as well, in which we are one with everybody. We can mix with anybody. We don't have the feeling that we are separate. That state can come only when we unite with Krishna. We get Krishna consciousness. Or Buddhists say Buddha consciousness, or Christians say Christ consciousness. Whichever way, it means the universal. So become one with me. That's in the middle of the Gita. And the same verse is repeated again in the 18th chapter, which shows that it is one of the important teachings of the Gita. Then we cross over to the second half with Vibhuti Yoga. Vibhuti means the powers or the glories of the Lord. We speak of God everywhere. God is all-pervading. There is nothing outside God. There is no place where God is not. Why do we have a temple then? Well, people say water is everywhere, but why do you go to a clean tap to drink water? It's because you want a place where you're assured that you will get a clean glass of water. Similarly, God is everywhere, but you want to go to a place where your mind can become concentrated, your devotional feelings can be awakened. So we make a temple, and we make a special place, and we say this is a holy spot, so that the mind can think about God there. But really speaking, God is everywhere. The Vibhuti Yoga tells us on all the glorious things. Srimat Urjitam Vibhutimat. Anything that you come across in life which has this quality of greatness, a radical strength, or something very wonderful, you should know that that is a manifestation of the qualities of the Lord. And in the chapter itself, he gives a long enumeration. We have so many uncountable categories of things. In each category, he picks the best, and he says that I am that best quality has come from my glory. And that takes you to Vishwarupa Darshana. By now the conversion of Arjuna is complete. He was a skeptic, he was a doubtful person, but by now you find that his faith in Krishna has become stabilized. He listens, he is willing to agree, and he now wants to have a cosmic vision to confirm his faith. You say in the scientific world, first there is a hypothesis, then there is a experiment. The scientist sits in the laboratory and he conducts an experiment, and then he confirms his experiment. He comes to the conclusion and he says, yes, I have scientific proof, and that is why the hypothesis is right. In spiritual life we have what is known as Anubhava. I have faith to begin with, and my faith gets confirmed when I have a darshan. I have a mystical experience in which I come face to face with the God that I am worshipping, and that confirms my faith. So all devotees have got some mystical experiences to talk about. You talk to any devotee, they will tell you how in their lives they have had this actual experience where they have felt the hand of God in various ways. They might not actually see the physical form, but they will see how they get an intuition, they get a feeling, somehow they get a confirmation that God is protecting them. They have that bipolarity. So in this case, Krishna gives Arjuna the Vishwarupa Darshana. Vishwa means the universe, Rupa, the universal form. Up to now, Arjuna was seeing Krishna only as the human form, as his counterpart, as another human being there in the battlefield. But he is given now the cosmic form of God. God has got the universal form. And when he sees the universal form, he is awed, he is struck by wonder, and he is also terribly scared, because it is mind-blowing. It is not something we can comprehend. Both good and evil, wonderful and terrible, all these opposites are all included in the cosmic vision. We think of God as being all good, all kind, but there is also a deadly aspect, destructive aspect of God, which is shown to Arjuna in the Vishwarupa Darshana. And he trembles and he says, no, show me again your benign form. And so Krishna again becomes his usual self and pacifies him. And also tells him that this form cannot be known by any other method except by devotion, by supreme one-pointed, ekantika bhaktika. If you have one-pointed devotion, exclusive of all else, it means you have no other interest in life, but only this one interest in knowing or being united with Lord or knowing God, then you can have this Vishwarupa Darshana too. Then that takes us to Bhakti Yoga, where the Gita gives its idea of what a devotee is. Normally we say devotee is a person who has many external trappings. He has a bead mala, or he goes to a temple, or he offers flowers and fruits. He observes certain days of fasting, certain days as special days. But the Gita's idea of a devotee is quite different. It's an internal transformation. When you say nirmama, nirahankara, when you have got rid of all sense of mind, you don't have egoism, you don't have any enemies, you're not disturbed by the world, you don't disturb the peace of the world. When you have all these qualities, then you say you are real devotee. And in this chapter also there is a discussion between how should we worship Krishna, with form or without form. This is a chapter favoring worshipping Krishna with form. And Nataraja Guru's commentary clearly says that superior person can meditate on God without form, and having with form is only a compromise. Another set of 6 chapters is over, and now we come back to more mundane issues. 13th chapter is Kshetra Kshetrajna Vibhaga Yoga. Kshetra means the field. Kshetrajna means the knower of the field. So we have a field in the sense that our nature, God has given us a nature, our genetics has given us a nature, our environment has given us a nature, our family has given us a nature. That is called the Kshetra, our field in which we live. And we have a knower of the field, that is the consciousness in us. And we should know the distinction between the field and the knower of the field. That is real wisdom. So this distinction is given in the 13th chapter. There are many diagnostic chapters in the Gita. Diagnostic means chapters which help us to diagnose what type of personalities we are. We should know ourselves. When we say we know ourselves, we should know what type of people we are. For that, this is one chapter the Gita gives for us to distinguish between the knower of the field and the field. It is just like people are fond of gardening, they grow many vegetables, let's say, kitchen garden. But they don't identify themselves with the garden. They say, this is my garden, this is me, I'm completely separate. But I have created this garden with my efforts, and I have sowed the seeds, and I have watered them, and I have put the manure, and I care for it, I have weeded it, and this is the garden I have created, that is my field. Similarly, our life too, we have created our own situations of life by our karmas, by the kind of life we have led, by the thoughts we have thought, by the deeds we have done. We have created the situations that we are in. Nobody else is responsible for it. We are responsible for creating our environment. That is our field, just like the gardener is responsible for creating. He can make it a beautiful garden or he can neglect it. It becomes a weedy garden. And a weedy garden, he can decide to pull out the weeds and it becomes a good garden again. So this sort of destiny is in our hands too. We are not totally bound by fate. We have the power to make our environment suitable for us. If we don't use that power, we are to blame for it, but we have it. This tells us clearly what is the field and what is the knower of the field. As knower of the field, we are spirit. Krishna says, I am the knower of the field of all fields. In our knowledge of the field, in the knowing aspect, our divine nature is there. Then we come to Gunatraya Vibhaga Yoga. Now we are shown the picture from the side of nature. As we said, Kshetra or nature. What is nature made up of? What is the nature of nature? So the Gita uses the Sankhya epistemology. It tells us we have three gunas. Our nature is made up of three qualities. The quality of sattva, the quality of rajas, and the quality of tamas. And everything that we do, everything that we think is influenced by these gunas. And we should know how to transcend the gunas. That is the great contribution of the Gita. Sattva guna, rajoguna, tamoguna. Ramakrishna Paramhansa has a story in which he says a wise man was walking through the forest and three bandits pounced on him. They wanted to take away his possessions. So one of them wanted to kill him, but the other person bound him. Third person freed him. So this is how the three gunas work. Sattva guna leads us always in the right path. And rajoguna makes us passionate, makes us active. We are full of action. Rajasic people can't sit quiet. They want action. They want excitement all the time. And tamoguna is what makes people lazy, lethargic, don't want to do anything, you want to postpone. That is tamoguna. So all three gunas are circulating in us like a triangle which is constantly turning with the apex above and two angles in the base. Similarly, one guna can predominate, the other two gunas will become recessive, and then the next guna can predominate and the other two gunas can become suppressed. In this way the gunas are always rotating. But we should know that the self, the spirit is separate apart from the gunas, and so we should be able to transcend the gunas. That is what this chapter will teach us. That is chapter 14. Then we come to the chapter 15, which is called Purushottama Yoga. Up till now we have dualities. You see, one side Purusha, one side Prakriti or nature, one side gunas, one side spirit. Now Gita being a book on Advaita, non-dualism, it resolves or it cancels out these dualities in the favor of one ultimate reality called Purushottama. Uttama means supreme. Purusha means person, the supreme person. He says there is one supreme Purushottama. That is explained in the 15th chapter. And technically speaking, the teachings of the Gita also come to an end after the 15th chapter. The 16, 17 and 18 deal with more mundane things, and by 18th chapter we have come back into the battlefield. So that leads us to the 16th chapter called Daivasuri Sampatti Vibhaga Yoga. This is also a diagnostic chapter to see what type of characteristics we have. Are we Daivi Sampattis or are we Asuri Sampatti? Daiva Sampatti means divine qualities. Asuri Sampatti means demonic qualities. And most people have a combination of divine and demonic. And the divine qualities in us lead us to greater and greater freedom, greater and greater purity, greater and greater happiness, all the good qualities of life. And the demonic aspects of life lead to greater and greater bondage and miseries. The whole Gita will describe in detail what is the characteristic of the divine person and what is the characteristic of the demonic person, so that each person can diagnose his or her own characteristics. Then that takes us to the 17th, which is called Shraddha Traya Vibhaga Yoga. Everybody does not strictly follow scriptures. Nobody is leading his life perfectly according to the Vedas from morning till evening. Only reading a Vedic life means following exactly what is written in the Vedas. So he says those people who don't follow these injunctions, what is their faith? Are they Rajasic or Sattvic or Tamasic? So Bhagavan Krishna here in the 17th chapter will explain to him what is the three types of faith that we have. Each person is motivated according to his faith, according to the type of faith. He likes certain type of food. He gives gifts with certain attitude. If he is a Rajasic person, he gives a gift with the hope that he will get some benefit, or he'll get a name, or that he gives it with reluctance. He gives it but wishes that he did not give it. And then there is the Tamasic person who gives at the wrong time to the wrong person in a very insulting manner. And then there is, of course, Sattvic, given to the right person, deserving person in the right way, in the right occasion. So again, this is another diagnostic chapter. Also in the 17th chapter, you have the Mahavakya, Om Tat Sat. That takes us to the Brahman aspect, the spirit aspect. Om is the only way by which we can designate Brahman. We speak of Brahman as the all-inclusive, everything, supreme, which is beyond thought, because it has no time, it has no space, it is eternal, it is without beginning, without end. Normal mind cannot imagine what it is like, but just to give it a name, we give it the name Om. Om is the only word that can be used to describe Brahman. It is Om Tat Sat, that which is real. Brahma Satyam Jagat Mithya, that is the real, that is the truth. And what we see here as the Jagat, the world, this has only a temporary reality. It is like an illusory reality. It does not have eternal reality. As we all know, everything here is changing. Everything here is undergoing transformation. Some of it slowly, some of it quite rapidly. But there is nothing in the visible world which does not undergo change. So if it is changing, how can it be permanent? It cannot be permanent. It's not a permanent world. Yet we feel that we have something substantial. We exist. We have a sense of existence. We have a sense of beingness. Where does our sense of beingness come from? That comes from Brahman. That is real. Om Tat Sat. So that Mahavakya is given in the 17th chapter, and that leads on to the 18th chapter called Sannyasa Yoga. It is a summing up of all the previous teachings, and also this is the chapter in which Krishna's teachings also come to an end, and Arjuna says, Nashto Moha Smritir Labdhva. I have regained my memory, regained my confidence, and all my delusions and wrong thinking is destroyed. I shall do as you say. I shall carry out your command. And the beauty of the Gita is Krishna here says, after listening to all this, do as you wish. So there is no force, there is no indoctrination that you must do this. He still gives freedom to Arjuna to do as he wishes. But Arjuna has become a wise person now, and he says that he knows what is to be done, what is not to be done, and he picks up his bow and he has a full idea of what is his duty. And the epic continues from here. So that Sanjaya comes in again. We said he is a literary device. So the last verses here again, Sanjaya comes in and he leads the narrative like a gentle fade out. The Gita's teachings are fading out and we are entering into the Mahabharata again. So this is how the scheme of the Gita takes us from the ordinary plane, takes us to the highest levels of mystical realizations, of mystical thoughts, of philosophical thoughts, of devotion, of high teachings of Brahma Vidya, science of the self, Yoga Shastra, and then gradually brings us back and puts us back into this world. So Gita does not teach escapism. Gita does not teach you, if you want to resolve your problems, drop everything and go somewhere. It does not say you can ever hope to achieve anything by leaving your station. Rather, be where you are and try to understand yourself. Lift yourself, raise yourself. So that is why this is one of the most wonderful scriptures. Also it revalues, the Gita is revaluing all the past teachings. The teachings that existed before its time are all re-examined and restated in a more modern way. It's like a rope which we have woven with many strands, because Indian spiritual culture has many, many streams. There was pre-Vedic culture, Vedic culture, there was the yoga system, philosophical system, the system of meditation, the system of action, the system of rituals. There were Jaina systems, so many varieties, and the Gita took the salient, the best things from all these different systems and wove a strand so that anybody reading the Gita can get the best from many traditions and knitted them all together as a Yoga Shastra and as a Brahma Vidya, and taught also the non-dual philosophy. The highest teaching is non-duality, that the ultimate reality and you are not separate, not different. That is Advaita. So it teaches Advaita. Advaita Amrita Varshini, showers the nectar of non-duality. So with that we come to the end of the preview of the Gita. There are many models given in the Gita of what a person should be like a bhakta, like a sthita prajna, like a yoga arudha, like a guna atita. These are given as the type of person that a aspirant, a sadhaka should strive to be. First is called sthita prajna, that will be given in the second chapter. Prajna means your consciousness or your buddhi, your intellect becomes steady when you become a sthita prajna. And then a bhakta, devotee, a yoga arudha, one who has ascended in yoga, attained a yogic state. And then a gunatita, one who has transcended the gunas. So these are the type of models that the Gita gives. When you become a gunatita, from your transcendental state, you can watch how the gunas are influencing the various activities that are happening in and around everybody. This whole world, according to the Sankhyans, is being run by the gunas. But the ignorant person takes the agency, thinks I am doing it. While as the wise person realizes, I am not doing anything. It is the gunas which are doing everything. Gunas are participating through me. And I am a witness, so I also witness. And I also can give my touch of wisdom, touch of guidance all the time. So then this person works with a sense of inner freedom. He's still working like everybody else. So Padma Patra Ivambhasa is just like a lotus leaf in water. The lotus leaf is floating on water, but it does not get wet. Similarly, the person involved is fully involved in the world of karma, like everybody else. He's also getting engaged in karma, but he's not affected by it because of his wisdom, his knowledge. So the yogi or the person of the Gita is not a lazy person, but a very active person, fully functioning in the world, yet fully alive to the divine also. So this is where both the worlds, the world of action and the world of the spirit, are interlaced beautifully in the Gita. That is why symbolically taught on the battlefield, you're learning the highest wisdom in a battlefield. It's paradoxical.